Welcome, everyone, to the Sad Crime Channel. In today's story, we travel to London in 2006. Although the police eventually solved the mystery surrounding the murder of 29-year-old Nisha Patel Nasri, it took them considerable time to untangle the web of lies and deception involved. At first, the case seemed straightforward, but the initial assumptions turned out to be entirely wrong. It was the small details, thorough investigations, and repeated analysis of the evidence that finally led to the truth coming to light. Justice was served, and those responsible were brought before the court. Join me as we delve into this gripping case. Nisha Patel Nasri was born in 1977 in Luton, a town in the southeast of England in Bedfordshire County. Her parents had emigrated from Gujarat, a state on the western coast of India. Nisha's life was marked by early tragedies. Her father passed away in 1996, and Nisha, deeply family-oriented, spent much of her time taking care of her mother. Unfortunately, her mother passed away just 5 years later, in 2001. Nisha spent most of her life in Wembley, a neighbourhood in northwest London known to football fans as the home of Wembley Stadium. Ambitious and hard-working, Nisha left school at 18 to open her own hair salon. She worked 7 days a week, and her efforts paid off. Within a decade, her business flourished, serving over 2,000 clients and earning her significant income. At 26, Nisha met Fadi Nasri, a man 4 years her senior. After dating for just 6 months, the couple married. Their friends described them as a loving and affectionate pair who seemed perfectly matched. A few months after meeting Fadi, Nisha decided to give back to her community by becoming a volunteer police officer, known as a special constable. She was passionate about helping the local area where she had grown up and lived her entire life. Nisha's dedication to both her business and community was well known. However, beneath the surface, not everything was as it seemed. She wanted to contribute to making the streets safer. Nisha carried out her duties as a special constable voluntarily, without pay. She believed it was an important role and that she was serving a just cause. Money was not her motivation in this case. Her older brother, Captain, lived just a few blocks away from her, and they saw each other often. The two had a great relationship. Captain recalls that his sister absolutely adored children and had several nieces and nephews. She was the perfect aunt, always spoiling them, buying gifts, taking them on trips, and organising birthday parties. Nisha also loved staying active, particularly enjoying swimming. She was cheerful, outgoing, talkative, and fearless. She wasn't afraid of confrontation and always spoke her mind. Together with her husband, Fadi Nasri, Nisha also co-managed a limousine rental business. Fadi handled most of the administrative responsibilities, while Nisha took care of the financial side of things. Both Fadi's company and Nisha's hair salon were thriving businesses. The couple's personal life seemed just as harmonious. They had a wide circle of friends and were well liked by everyone who knew them. It seemed like they had everything they could ever need for happiness, and their future appeared bright. On the evening of May 11th, 2006, Fadi and Nisha's brother stopped by her hair salon shortly before it closed to get their hair cut. Later, Fadi prepared dinner for his wife, as they had celebrated their 3rd wedding anniversary the day before. After dinner, Fadi left their home to play pool with a friend. Nisha, feeling tired, took a shower, changed into her pajamas, and began preparing for bed. Around 11:30 p.m., the quiet of the street where Nisha lived was shattered by a loud, piercing scream. Alarmed by the noise, neighbours came out of their homes to see what had happened. On the driveway, they found Nisha Patel Nasri lying in a pool of blood. The neighbours immediately called for an ambulance, but Nisha was already unconscious. Her husband, Fadi, was contacted and arrived shortly after the paramedics. He appeared completely distraught and in shock. News of the incident also reached Nisha's brother, who rushed to her home. Together with Fadi, he followed the ambulance to the hospital. Tragically, Nisha died half an hour later. She had suffered a single stab wound. The blade had struck her femoral artery in the groin, causing her to bleed to death. Everything indicated that Nisha had been attacked on the doorstep of her own home. The perpetrator fled the scene immediately after the assault. The neighbours were horrified. The street where Nisha lived was in a quiet, peaceful area. At first, the police suspected it might have been a burglary gone wrong. The state of the house didn't align with that theory. There were no signs of a break-in, and the home was tidy and undisturbed. In the living room, cash was found lying on the sofa, approximately £350, which represented the day's earnings that Nisha had brought home from her hair salon. Additionally, her wallet, with all her bank cards and her mobile phone, were untouched. Nothing suggested that anyone had tried to break into the limousine parked in front of the house, a vehicle Fadi rented out as part of his business. The only thing missing was the largest kitchen knife. In Nisha's kitchen, there were 2 blocks of knives, and only one slot was empty. Fadi was certain that earlier that day all the knives had been in their proper places. Next to the knife blocks stood neatly stacked champagne glasses. They were neither broken nor disturbed, which led investigators to believe the knife was taken calmly, not during a heated confrontation or in haste. The missing knife was nowhere to be found inside the house or on the driveway, suggesting the perpetrator had taken it and used it as the murder weapon. On the other hand, there were no signs that the attacker had entered the house. Blood was only found outside. Investigators considered the possibility that Nisha might have heard something suspicious, grabbed the knife, and stepped outside, where she was attacked. The assailant might have then taken the knife from her, inflicted the wound, and fled the scene. Neighbours were interviewed, and one of them reported seeing a man hurrying away from the scene that night. According to their description, he was a large, heavy-set black man wearing a hooded sweatshirt. 2 other witnesses also reported seeing someone matching this description lingering in the area before the attack. The case garnered national attention and appeared on the front pages of major newspapers across the country. Authorities appealed for anyone with relevant information to come forward. Both Fadi and Keaton made public appearances, pleading for help in finding Nisha's killer. Police questioned Nisha's husband and friends and confirmed Fadi's alibi. They sought to determine whether Nisha had any enemies, whether anyone bore ill will toward her, or if anything unusual had occurred in her life recently. Fadi informed the investigators of an alarming incident that had taken place just 5 days before Nisha's death. 2 men had attempted to break into their home while Nisha was alone. Initially, they tried to deceive her into letting them in. When that failed, they used a crowbar and attempted to force the lock. Ultimately, they were unsuccessful and left. One of the intruders was reportedly a black man in a hood, matching the description of the individual seen near the house on the night of the murder. Nisha had been deeply shaken by the break-in attempt. Detectives didn't believe this incident was a coincidence. It seemed too unlikely to be unrelated to the later attack. Fadi also revealed that someone had been threatening both him and his wife. He told investigators about a business dispute from 2 months earlier, involving a limousine he sold to a woman in Glasgow who also ran a car rental business. As part of their agreement, Fadi retained the right to use the vehicle for previously scheduled bookings. However, the woman was dissatisfied with the car's condition and refused to let him borrow it again. In response, Fadi took the limousine without permission, completed his commitments, and then returned it to her. Understandably upset, the woman made several heated phone calls, which Fadi recorded. He handed his phone over to the police so they could review the recordings of her threats. Investigators had to pursue this lead, as the attack's intended target might have been Fadi, not Nisha.
The biggest mistake of your life, so get your bitch your wife out of your house now, and I'm not joking. You with the wrong person here, pal. With the wrong person.
Someone has got to know something. Who lives around them, a neighbour, or seen some blood, or someone acting suspiciously or nervous. Just might not be important, but...
It was possible that Nisha was attacked simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Officers travelled to Scotland to interview the new owner of the limousine, the same woman who had exchanged heated words with Fadi during their earlier dispute. However, she was quickly ruled out as a suspect, leaving investigators back at square one. Meanwhile, searches for the murder weapon continued in the vicinity of Nisha's home. Investigators scoured parks, drains, trash bins and gardens, even employing metal detectors, hoping the perpetrator had discarded the knife nearby. Finally, 2 weeks later, about half a mile from the crime scene, a knife was found embedded in the ground beneath a drainage grate. Although the knife had been exposed to running water in the drain, which likely washed away potential evidence, police confirmed it was the murder weapon after finding traces of Nisha's DNA on it. Unfortunately, no additional evidence linking the knife to the attacker could be recovered. The detectives decided to review local surveillance footage. While no cameras directly covered the drain where the knife was found, one nearby camera captured a crucial detail. On the night of the murder at 11:30 p.m., shortly after the attack, a car briefly stopped behind another vehicle parked near the area. For about 7 seconds, the headlights of the stopping car reflected off the parked vehicle. The car then moved on, fully visible in the camera's frame. Unfortunately, the footage was too grainy to read the license plate. Still, investigators identified the vehicle as a silver Audi A4. However, with over 18,000 such vehicles registered in southeast England alone, this detail seemed initially unhelpful. Further analysis revealed two distinctive features. One of the license plate lights on the Audi wasn't working, and the car had an antenna mounted on the roof. These details offered a slim chance of narrowing down the search. Investigators began reviewing all silver Audi A4s registered in London and southeast England, but it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. With limited progress, the police decided to examine the data from Fadi's phone, which they had seized. When the police found a photo of another woman's naked thigh on Nasri's mobile phone, he blithely claimed it was just a friend. It became evident that Fadi was involved in a close relationship outside his marriage, and detectives suspected he was having an affair. When confronted, Fadi initially denied the allegations, but eventually admitted he had been seeing another woman for 3 months. His mistress, Laura, was from Lithuania and worked as a prostitute. Fadi, a regular client of Laura's, had developed a romantic relationship with her. They secretly met in hotels, and Fadi showered her with expensive gifts, even taking her on a vacation to Egypt. He told Nisha he needed to visit a sick uncle during that trip. This revelation turned Fadi into the prime suspect in the case. Detectives also questioned Laura, considering the possibility that she and Fadi had conspired to murder Nisha to remove her from his life. After speaking with Laura, however, they concluded she had no involvement in the crime. When Nisha's family learned about Fadi's affair, they were stunned. They revealed to the investigators that Fadi had been obsessively worried about what police might uncover on his phone, to the point that he couldn't sleep at night. He kept saying that he knew various shady figures, and that's why he was worried. And indeed, Fadi did know such individuals. The police discovered that in the days leading up to his wife's death, he had been in constant contact with a well-known local drug dealer, 38-year-old Roger Leslie, who was an aggressive and very violent man. Roger had many piercings, the number of which, he claimed, corresponded to all the people he had ever killed. The police considered various possibilities, that Fadi himself used drugs, that he might have been involved in drug dealing, or that Roger might have been involved in Nisha's murder. Interestingly, Roger called Fadi practically immediately after the attack on Nisha. Based on Roger's cell phone data, investigators tried to determine if he was in the area where the attack occurred, but it turned out that the man was elsewhere at the time. However, there was one additional detail that caught the police's attention. Before calling Fadi, Roger had spoken with someone else. The number belonged to 42-year-old Emmanuel, who worked at a nightclub. The investigators decided to look into him as well, and it was revealed that Emmanuel drove a silver Audi A4. Furthermore, the investigators found that the car had a roof antenna and one of the license plate lights wasn't working, which led them to arrest him. His car was analysed, and luminol revealed that a bloodied knife was found inside on the armrest. At first, Emmanuel was reluctant to cooperate, but all the evidence pointed against him, so he eventually admitted that he had been near Nisha's house the night of the murder, but he hadn't gotten out of his car. He claimed he was just the driver, taking someone to complete a drug transaction. He insisted that he didn't know the purpose of the trip was a murder. Eventually, he revealed that the man he had been driving was Jason Jones, and it was Jones who killed Nisha. Jones worked as a bouncer at a local nightclub and was well known to the police. He already had 75 convictions, including theft, assault, assaulting a police officer, and possession of a weapon. When investigators asked Emmanuel why, right after the attack on Nisha, he had called Roger Leslie, he stated that it was Jason Jones who had used his phone to call Roger, and that it was Jones who spoke to him. This wasn't the only person with whom Jason had contacted that night using Emmanuel's phone. Among the calls made, there were numbers of people Emmanuel didn't even know and had never spoken to before. Emmanuel also testified that Jason told him after the attack on Nisha that he had seen a large amount of cash in the living room. This was an important clue for the police, as they had previously assumed that the murderer had never entered the house, and that the entire event had occurred in the driveway. However, based on the fact that there were no signs of a break-in inside the house, the investigators concluded that the perpetrator must have had a key. They began to consider the possibility that the perpetrator had entered the house and taken a knife from the kitchen. Nisha must have heard someone downstairs and gone to check if Fadi had returned. When she saw the stranger, she tried to flee through the front door. That's when Jones attacked her, wounded her, and fled the scene. When the question arose as to how Jason Jones had a key to Nisha's house, the investigators had only one answer: Fadi, Nisha's husband. Furthermore, they soon learned of Fadi's financial situation. Fadi had debts amounting to over £100,000. His business barely brought in any profit. It also turned out that Nisha had taken out a life insurance policy just 3 months before the murder. The only beneficiary in the event of her death was her husband, who would receive about £350,000. Fadi was not only a disloyal husband, lying and cheating on his wife, but now there was also a potential motive for the crime: financial gain. The police had 4 suspects in the case: Emmanuel, the driver; Jason Jones, who attacked Nisha; Roger Leslie, who was probably just a link between the murderer and Fadi, the main mastermind behind the entire operation, who stood to benefit from Nisha's death. Roger Leslie had taken the job and found the person who was supposed to kill the woman. When all the collected evidence was presented to Fadi, the man began to sob uncontrollably and couldn't calm down. Later, during questioning, he said nothing at all. He didn't utter a word. Aside from Emmanuel, none of the men provided any explanations. When asked questions, they all responded uniformly without comment. In February 2007, the men were charged with the murder of Nisha. None of them admitted guilt. The police were apprehensive about the trial, as although they had gathered a lot of circumstantial evidence, most of it was still not definitive. In 2008, the trial began, lasting 4 months. On May 28th, after 6 days of deliberation by the jury, Fadi Nasri and Jason Jones were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The judge said Fadi, 34, would have received a higher sentence, but he could not be sure the motivation was money. He had wanted to set up a new life with his Lithuanian prostitute girlfriend, Laura Mokine, who was in the public gallery to see him jailed. His debts had virtually bankrupted his limousine business, but hairdresser Nisha's death meant he was rescued by a massive insurance payout. Recorder of London, Peter Beaumont, QC, said, although her death undoubtedly provided an opportunity for Nasri to continue his liaison with his mistress and undoubtedly involved, as a byproduct, him benefiting from her insurance policies, the guilty verdict did not require the jury to be satisfied that this was a contract killing for gain. As the jury's verdict makes clear, Nasri was far from being the devoted spouse. In fact, he was more in love with his successful wife's wealth than with her. Fadi had dragged them deep into debt after failing to run a limousine hire business, which Nisha had funded with £15,000. Her arrogant and reckless husband drove a luxury Lexus and wore a stolen £10,000 Hublot Swiss watch, all while spending lavishly on his mistress. His extravagant lifestyle was funded by reckless spending, with little regard for the consequences. In stark contrast, Nisha, who earned £60,000 a year from her hairdressing business and volunteered with the police, was wise with her money and always careful about her financial decisions. Nasri, however, had grown determined to leave his wife. To fund his lover's extravagant tastes, he knew he needed money. He had already spent thousands on jewellery, expensive clothes, lavish hotels with his mistress. He paid hitmen £18,000 to assassinate his wife. Roger Leslie was also sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Emmanuel was acquitted. Fadi had previously been convicted of dangerous driving and reckless driving. In 1998, he had been jailed for 9 months for driving at a policeman who asked about an out-of-date tax disc. Interestingly, before meeting Nisha, Fadi ran a small escort agency, which Nisha disapproved of from the very beginning. Eventually, she managed to convince Fadi to close it down. Nisha loved her husband, but was aware of his flaws. She knew that Fadi was completely disorganized and often late. Nevertheless, she believed that he was a good driver and invested money so he could open a limousine rental business. It was actually her idea. After Nisha's death, the media quickly learned of Fadi's involvement in the pimping business and that in 2004, Nisha, as a police officer, had received a warning for abusing her position and badge. At the time, she had helped Fadi collect a debt related to his previous business, the escort agency. After her death, the media insinuated that she had been involved in her husband's illegal activities, even though she was a police officer. The London police emphasised, however, that although the incident of abuse of power did indeed occur, it was investigated and properly examined, and later, Nisha carried out her duties without any reservations. Another interesting fact is that Fadi's father, Farooq Nasri, was convicted in 1994 for assaulting his girlfriend, and in 1999 he was accused of murdering his next partner and her son. While waiting for his trial, the man hanged himself in his cell. Nisha's brother, Keaton, said, "The attack they carried out on Nisha was barbaric. They showed her no mercy and have shown absolutely no remorse since. It is not a man but a coward who attacks a vulnerable woman with a knife. Nisha never stood a chance." He said of his sister, "She was always one of those people who wanted to look after someone or help somebody. Everybody can see her photographs. She's always smiling with warmth in her eyes. She was always bubbly with a cheeky smile on her face. That expression speaks 1,000 words." Detective Chief Inspector Nick Scholar, who led the investigation, said, "These 3 convicted men lied during the investigation and the trial to cover up that they entered Nisha's home and killed her for their own ends." The very fact that Nisha's husband instigated this killing so that he could be with his younger mistress and gain financially from her death is the ultimate betrayal. That's all for today. Thank you for listening. Take care.